Boston Celtics announced that President Danny Ainge was retiring and that head coach Brad Stevens is going to take over basketball operations. So the Celtics now looking for a head coach. Maybe Danny, I don't know. Maybe Danny Ainge, maybe it's him. Here is Danny Ainge on the big announcement yesterday.
They've had a lot of ups and downs and fun and sad losses. And, today is not a great day. I wish we would have, finished the year on a much better note. But I feel like there's so much hope in the Celtics going forward.
One of the benefits of moving into this new role is I've got a good idea of what we do and don't do well, and what can accentuate some of our, best players. And so there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work ahead. We are in a good place. We have a lot of really positive things. And, it's our job to capitalize on that.
I like that.
They took a moment. They took a moment, as well they should take a moment to let it all sink in that Danny will no longer be with the organization. He might be on a consulting basis. Who knows? Anyway, Broussard, do you share Danny Ainge and Brad Stevens' optimism for the Celtics' future after the front office shakeup yesterday, the one that has me torn up?
You know what, Jenna? I know Nick's going to get on
Tell
here
me.
and act like the sky is falling in Boston. But I do share their optimism.
No,
I know the owner and Brad Stevens talked about, getting banner number 18 or die trying. I'm not saying banner number 18 is in the near future. However, they are still they've got great building blocks in Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, who any coach would love to walk into this situation. Their only bad contract is really Kemba Walker because he's got the player option 2 years from now at $37 million. Outside of that, their cap situation isn't too bad. And as I mentioned, they've got the two building blocks. When I look at the East, the only team that definitively is ahead of them for the foreseeable future, well, not even foreseeable future, next few years, is Brooklyn. But Brooklyn is older, and we'll see how long they stay together. Let me finish, Nick. Milwaukee, yes, they're better than Boston. But I'm not yet convinced they're world beaters. Their go-to guy is Chris Middleton. Their best player, Giannis, who's phenomenal, can't shoot. And that's a problem. And it's been a problem in the playoffs. And until he rectifies it, we're going to continue to harp on that. And then Philadelphia, yes, with Joel Embiid, they're better. But who knows what Joel Embiid, how available he's going to be, not only this season, but for the foreseeable future. So when I look at those things, I say, Atlanta's nice, but they're not scaring me if I'm Boston. With Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, I like the building blocks. They got to bring in the right coach. I like some of the names I'm hearing. Chauncey Billups, Sam Cassell. They should throw Mark Jackson in there, too, although they won't. But I think they hired the right coach. I do think their future is bright. They'll be contenders. They'll be relevant. They'll be in the hunt.
Contending for what? The second round of the playoffs? Yes. For championships? No. There's only 16 teams in the conference, and 3 of them are clearly better than them right now and going into the future, and that's not even including Miami, and Miami always has another move coming, and Miami happens to have the advantage of being a city NBA guys actually like playing in, as opposed to Boston, which is the opposite of that. Listen, if you would like to hear a Danny Ainge hagiography about all the amazing things he's done, hit me up on Twitter. I've got some great podcasts I can recommend for you from folks Danny Ainge's been feeding info to for a decade, and now they're devastated that he's gone. But the reality is that Danny Ainge oversaw the least successful 20 years in the history of the Celtics franchise. The reality is that Danny Ainge somehow, after always coveting assets, walks out the door with the Celtics having zero future assets in the plus column. They don't have any extra first-round picks. They don't have any great young player coming up the pipeline that we just drafted. They have Tatum and Brown. And Tatum and Brown are excellent, and Tatum and Brown are good enough to where you should be like, man, we should be in the second round of the playoffs if everything works out well. Say it again, Broussard, that last part.
And they're young, too.
I'm not being
They're young.
No, yeah, Tatum and Brown are young. But I mean, they don't have it's not like they're like, well, and we have this blue chip Michael Porter Jr. type guy from 2 years ago. That is, Romeo Langford ain't that. Peyton Pritchard ain't that. Grant Williams ain't that. And so what happened to Danny Ainge Wilds was his biggest strengths ended up becoming his biggest weaknesses. Danny Ainge won a title because he got a heist of a trade and then pulled off the greatest heist of a trade ever with the Brooklyn trade with KG and Pierce. And after that, that became his biggest weakness because he would never make a trade unless there was going to be a heist. And heists don't happen that often. And Danny Ainge's biggest strength at one point in time was his team held over LeBron. LeBron couldn't get through him. And then LeBron got better, and he ended Danny Ainge's season 5 times. And then Danny Ainge's biggest strength was, I finally got my superstar. I'm trading for Kyrie. And then Kyrie Irving stomped on that stupid Lucky logo and ended his career. So what was his greatest strengths all came back around to his greatest weaknesses, and now he's gone. And he's going to go run Utah or be a consultant there or whatever it is. And I'm sure all of a sudden we'll hear about how Utah was this close to getting Anthony Davis and this close to getting Kawhi Leonard because he was always this close to getting a guy who then won the title while his team was always looking long-term, which was little, they had more long-term than other teams because they had longer off seasons than other teams. That's what it was.
Yeah.
So, but congrats on a good run, I guess.
I feel like I'm in the middle of you and Broussard because I think Danny Ainge is a classic story of happiness is reality over expectations. And Danny Ainge had huge expectations because it was the Celtics, because they were after banner number 17, which they got, and number 18, which they didn't get. But if you went back and immediately after Kevin Garnett said anything is possible and pulled Danny Ainge aside and said, hey, Danny, if we give you a decade plus, do you think we could get banner 18? I think Danny Ainge would say yes, and it didn't happen. And by that measure, he failed. And then when you get the Brooklyn trade and we hear all this assets and we're like, whoa, my goodness, heist of the century, you fleeced Billy King and you got good players out of it, but it was no banners. It's about banners. And Brandon, here's the other tricky thing that hasn't been discussed enough. Boston sports, New England sports doesn't happen in a vacuum. And for the better part of a century, the Celtics were the great franchise of not only the NBA, but in all of professional sports. And you know what? The Patriots were a joke, and the Red Sox were like the poster child for being losers. But then the century changed, and the Patriots became a dynasty, and the Red Sox won 4 World Series. And old Danny Ainge is there with his one trophy that him and Kevin McHale put together, and then everyone's looking around like, huh, what's up with the Celtics? And everyone gets a little bit antsy. Because if you look at 2 teams, and I'll end here, 2 teams got knocked out of the playoffs. The Knicks and the Celtics. The Knicks literally gave them a standing ovation. Great job. 4-1, we're out. The Celtics also went 4-1. You know what happened? Danny Ainge is gone, and Brad Stevens like, I'm out of here. It's the same result this year. But there's vastly different expectations. So I think Danny Ainge did a middling job, but the expectations were so great he wasn't able to get there.
Yeah, and to your point, as far as one of those historical franchises, it's like growing up, and even when I made it to the league, when I was in the NFL, every time you saw a big-name free agent, they were always there. They was always at the table, whether it was LeBron James, whether it was KD, meet me in the Hamptons, let's take you through our pitch. Now you got the guy, Nick, that you said was the problem, and Danny Ainge, and now he's gone. So now when you look at everything Chris said, I have to share the same optimism as Ainge and Stevens because of, everything he just said. I mean, you got to look at Kemba Walker, 2 years, $73 million, $77 million. What do you do with that? You probably need to move on. You got Marcus Smart sitting there, 1 year left on his deal.